Jay Seegert is here from Wisconsin. He's been involved in creation versus evolution for 40 years, been teaching on that part-time while he was doing a job for about 23 years. In the last 17 years, he's gone full-time into this ministry. And so he's got quite a bit of experience. I'm going to let him talk about some of the things he does and about the Starting Point project that he runs in his ministry. But also note that he has other roles that he plays. He's actually the current president of Logos Research Organization. And this is comprised of scientists who are active in doing research and sharing ideas with them. So he'll talk about that a bit. And another side thing that he does, he goes with some other speakers to Fiji. And Fiji is a set of islands out in the Pacific Ocean, and they are very open to hearing the gospel. Very different from our environment here, and I'm sure he'll mention a few words about that as well. So tonight he's going to speak on the topic, evolution. Is it probable or is it problematic? And so he'll give us the answer. Jay, come on up.
Well, good evening. It's an honor to be here. I have a very exciting talk for you. It's very unique. The first part of it's going to cover some basic things about how evolution supposedly works, and the last half or third or so is going to get into stuff that's really unique, really powerful, and also really easy to understand. And it's one of the most powerful evidences that I know as to why evolution just isn't possible. So we'll be getting into that. You know a little bit about my background. I usually say you may not know me from a hole in the ground, so I'll go over a little bit more background. There's me, and there's a hole in the ground. So I use that slide as a warning. I have a very, very dry sense of humor, so you have to tolerate that for just a little bit. But I was raised in a Christian home, and you can see very clearly that that is a Christian home. And it was actually my mom that led me to Christ when she was teaching Backyard Bible Club. I was 5 years old, so the kids from the neighborhood would come over. And I'm very indebted to both my parents. They both, I don't say passed on, I say they just changed addresses. I'll see them later. But they not only taught me the right things, they lived it out. So I saw the Christian life lived out at home. It's just an awesome upbringing, and it's kind of, other than God's sovereignty, it's why I'm here doing this today. So Mom led me to Christ, 5 years old. I think the next week I went bowling, and now I'm here today. So that brings you up to speed. Actually, I graduated from public high schools, and then I went to a Christian university, John Brown University in Arkansas, to study mechanical engineering. Got a degree, but then I became more interested in physics. John Brown didn't have a physics major back then, so I left and went back to Wisconsin, where I lived, went to the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater to get a degree in physics. And that's when my world changed quite a bit, going from a small Christian college, where my engineering professors opened up every class in prayer, that was kind of cool, to a large state university where my physics professors did not open up in prayer. Maybe they forgot, I should have reminded them. They were all evolutionists, some of them were atheists, and they were telling me that everything I believed was wrong. And that made me very uncomfortable, to be surrounded by those PhD scientists who I assumed they had a lot of evidence for what they believed, and I realized for the first time in my entire life that, yeah, I know what I believe, I just don't know why. I couldn't defend the Christian worldview. I won't go into it now. I mentioned that I assumed my professors had evidence for what they believed, but I didn't have any for what I believed. I found out later they had nothing. And I mean literally nothing. I asked every one of my physics professors and thermodynamics and geology and all that. They didn't give me one example evidence to back up what they believed. That's a whole nother story. But so anyway, when I realized I don't know why I believe what I believe, God put it in my heart to start looking into things. So I've been looking into things for 40 years now. And a little over 18 years ago, I felt called into full-time ministry. I had my own computer programming business at that time. So I shut that down and founded the Starting Point Project. It's all about our starting point. That's why we call our ministry the Starting Point Project. Everyone starts somewhere with their beliefs. It's impossible to not start somewhere. Everyone starts somewhere. Christians start with the belief that God exists and the Bible is the Word of God. And then we use that foundation to define everything else. That's a whole nother talk. I'm not going into that one. Along the way, I was also invited to be on the board of directors of Logos Research Associates. This is the world's largest group of scientists who are biblical creationists. Dr. John Sanford, he was from Cornell University. He's worldwide famous for having invented something called the gene gun. And it inserts genes into the DNA. He was an atheist for much of his life. Now he's a very strong Christian, very godly man, very humble, brilliant, brilliant scientist, one of the world's leading scientists. Then there's Dr. John Baumgartner. He's a PhD geophysicist. He just happened to build the world's best 3D computer simulation of plate tectonics. Even secular geologists use that model to see how plates of the earth are moving. So just, again, off the charts, brilliant. So there's those two scientists, myself and some other scientists. If these guys, as brilliant as they are, if they were here with us this evening, they would be the first to admit out of all 8 board members, I am the tallest. And so, pretty proud of that. Dr. Sanford, who started the group, he was president 2 years ago. He asked if I'd step up and become president, so now I'm president, and I've lost all respect for the rest of those guys if they want me to lead them. But it's very humbling, all the doors that God has opened. And trust me, it has nothing to do with me. I am absolute proof that God exists, and He's very gracious. But I get to hang around these guys. In fact, I just had lunch with Dr. Sanford about 2 weeks ago in Nashville. I was speaking down there. My wife was with me, and last July I was out in Virginia where Dr. Baumgartner lives. He invited me over for cookouts. We had a July 4th cookout in his backyard. But these guys are brilliant. They're doing cutting-edge research, and then I get to take their research results and translate it into English for everyone else. So you're going to hear English today in what I present. I'm going to keep it really simple but super powerful. Quick overview of the ministry. Been in full-time ministry 18 years, been speaking 40 years total. Given over 3,400 talks all over the country, 9 other countries as well. Spoken to West Point officers, U.S. Naval Academy, both 5 times. They each wanted to be an annual event. I lead Grand Canyon tours. Here's a picture from the top of Horseshoe Bend. We actually raft around the Colorado River there around Horseshoe Bend earlier in the day, then we come up topside in the evening to take sunset pictures. My daughter actually works for me full-time. She coordinates a lot of our tours and then does some other things. And then our son, he's been on some of my tours, and a few years ago another group flew me down to Arizona to give some lectures, and then they wanted to hike all the way to the bottom and up. We don't do that. My ministry's tours are family friendly, but they wanted to hike all the way down. I hadn't done that before, and I asked if my son could go, so he went with me. We went in February, and the trails at the top were covered with snow and ice, and I'm afraid of heights. I figured the canyon shouldn't be a problem for me because the canyon is not high. It's just really deep. It's like a mile deep. So you got drop-offs of 1,000 feet and you're on ice and snow. That didn't help. But anyway, we made it out. It was a great experience. My wife had gone on some of my tours earlier years ago, but since then we've added a couple things. Going to the top of Horseshoe Bend, and another thing that we added that she really, really wanted to do and got to do last September was a beautiful orange wavy Antelope Canyon. So we hiked through this slot canyon. It is so cool going through that. So she got to go through that, and that was a lot of fun. I'm going to show you very briefly just a 2-minute promo video of our Grand Canyon tours because it doesn't fit in so much with the talk that I'm going to give, but I want you to know about our tours. We take people to the Grand Canyon not just to show them a big hole in the ground. Anybody can do that. But how many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? Probably quite a few. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon with a creationist, a scientist who could point out all the scientific evidences for the Genesis flood? That's very typical. Nobody. The rest of you, you saw a big hole in the ground. It's super cool hole in the ground, but literally after you've been there an hour or two or whatever, you're just like, wow, there it is. It's, wow. What else can you think other than there it is? You take 50 million pictures, you go home, you show your friends, and they're like, wow, that looks kind of interesting. No, it was amazing. Yeah, the pictures don't do it justice, so you're frustrated. If you don't go with our ministry, and you don't have to, go with one of the other ministries. Go with a ministry who could take you there and show you the scientific evidence for the Genesis flood. That's why we go. We go there to talk about the authority of Scripture. And on our tours, they're family friendly. We stay in hotels, air-conditioned coach bus, eat in restaurants. We raft the river, smooth sailing. It's not whitewater rafting. And it's like about a third of the cost of the other tours where they do all those types of things. So our tours are easy, inexpensive. And the entire tour, I do apologetic training. You will find out how you can know that God exists. Not just have some evidences like, well, I think because of this, God probably exists. No, you can know for sure. How do you know the creation evolution controversy? How do you know the Genesis creation account is true? How do you know there was a worldwide flood? How do you know Jesus is the Son of God? How do you know the Bible is the inspired Word of God? How do you mentor your children and grandchildren? How do you graciously reach out to skeptics? I cover all those things and a lot more all throughout the tour. It's just nonstop fun. You'll see dinosaur tracks and petroglyphs and all that. So here's the 2-minute promo.
Welcome to the Grand Canyon. You've all seen pictures. Come and see the real thing. Jay Seegert here with the Starting Point Project to invite you to come along on one of our Grand Canyon tours where you will be on the top rim of the canyon looking down, and you'll also get to be on the Colorado River. And all throughout our trip, we share scientific evidences that there really was a worldwide flood, just like we learned from Genesis 6 through 8. We know there was worldwide flood action, but not always the same way you see here. We want to take you from being in a position where you are praying and hoping that no one asks you about this flood story and Noah's Ark and all that, to a point where you're thinking, please, please ask me.
Just learning about the creation theory and being able to really be equipped to defend that theory.
Chance to learn a little bit more about just what God's done in the past and His beautiful world that He created.
The only explanation for the canyon is really catastrophic water action.
Easy to understand, but yet profound.
It helps me to articulate what I believe so much better.
You'll be so excited about the authority of God's Word, that it can be trusted from cover to cover, so that you can be more emboldened when you're graciously sharing the gospel message with those around you. The problem isn't the evidence, because facts don't speak for themselves.
What was your favorite part?
The dinosaur tracks.
Dinosaur tracks? Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's unbelievable. You have to see it in person.
It is an amazing place to visit, and we want to go on this journey with you, so get a hold of us to learn about the details of our trips, which you can find at thestartingpointproject.com.
You missed the cool part. At the end, after we get off the river, there's this huge, huge mushroom rock, and we all line up underneath it, get a photo op. It's kind of neat. But anyway, if you want more information about the tours, we've got brochures in the back. You can go to our website and get more information there. You can watch this video again. We generally work with groups. People say, we got X amount of people, and then we can work out a date that works with you and your group. And if you can't fill the bus, we could take like 54 people total, including my daughter and I. But we usually ask for a minimum of 35 for a group. And if that's all you can get, that's fine. We'll open up the other seats to the general public. If you want to fill the bus, then it's your private tour in a sense that way. So anyway, it's great stuff, very exciting. It will fire you up in your faith unbelievably. So I'm doing 7 tours this year, and they're all full. But we can start scheduling something for next year if you're interested. So with that, back to the background, I do weekly podcasts. I've got about 102, I think, that are released every Friday. So yesterday and no, today's Friday. A new one came out today. I don't know which one it is. I haven't checked, but we've already reached like the top 5% of podcasts on the planet in 77 countries. So it's kind of exciting. They're very skeptic friendly. You can send links to your skeptical friends, because I tell the skeptics who are listening, if you're listening to me right now, I'm totally honored. I can't believe you're spending any time having to listen to anything I have to say, and I'm not asking you to trust me or believe me or feel it in your heart. I'm just asking you to think about these things, and then I just go through very logically and rationally a defense for the Christian worldview. So those are the podcasts. 3 books that I've written, they're also out on the table. I'll talk about those maybe at the end, but this is what you came for, the actual talk. Evolution probable or problematic? And here's the background of the talk. I was invited to go to a bioinformatics symposium at Cornell University, prestigious university in New York. Bioinformatics, what's that? It's information in living things. So that's what it was about. It was 27 lectures in 3 days. It was intense. Some of the world's leading scientists were there, and it was by invitation only. You couldn't just show up, you had to be invited. Well, Dr. Sanford from Cornell, who started Logos Research Associates, which I'm president of now, he invited me to go. I didn't really know him at the time, but he invited me to go, so I got to go, took lots of notes, and I put this talk together. So the talk you're going to hear is what I put together after hearing 27 lectures. And then I called him up afterwards and I said, hey, if I come back to New York, could I spend a little time with you picking your brain to make sure my presentation is accurate? He said, sure. So I actually stayed at his house for 2.5 days, and I was like a kid in the candy store. And he said, yes, your presentation is accurate, and I love your PowerPoint. And so that made me feel good. In fact, I just spoke in Nashville about 2 weeks ago, and he, since he was in the area, he came in to hear me speak, and I was giving this talk, and he's never heard me give this talk, the one I developed after going to his symposium. And so he said he really enjoyed it, for really seeing it presented for the first time. So that's the background of this particular presentation. Now, how many of you ever seen Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? A number of you. Kind of a dangerous program to watch. You might find out that maybe you're not smarter than a fifth grader. Do we need to change out mics? I can. Okay, turn.
Are we on? Okay. Well, my name is Jay Seegert, and okay, I won't start over. So, are you smarter than a fifth grader? We're going to change this up a bit and ask, are you smarter than a PhD scientist? Now, most people would say, well, of course not. I mean, those guys are brilliant. I honestly believe after you hear this presentation, you truly will be smarter than most PhD scientists when it comes to the creation versus evolution controversy. Why is it? Is it because those scientists aren't very smart? Oh no, they're really smart. So I never argue with that. These scientists, skeptics, atheists, whatever, they're really, really intelligent. Obviously the Bible says there's a big difference between intelligence and wisdom. Wisdom is the proper application of intelligence, but so these PhD scientists are brilliant. So how can you be smarter than a PhD scientist? Because what you're about to hear, the vast, vast majority of PhD scientists know nothing about. Most PhD scientists don't even really know about evolution. They're making rocket fuel, cell phones, curing diseases. They're doing a whole bunch of stuff. They're not studying evolution. That's not their area. They're smart people and they know their area. They just trust and have faith that the other scientists have figured out evolution. It's good enough for them. They don't need to know the evidence. That's how it works. That would be a whole nother talk. But when you learn this about evidence for creation, you'll be better positioned to discuss the controversy than the majority of PhD scientists out there. Even many scientists who do study evolution, they either don't know about this or they really don't like it and don't want to think about it. So that's where we're headed. I'm going to give you some background information, and then we're going to get into some stuff that will blow you away. It's so cool. So since we're talking about evolution, we need to define it because this word is used in so many different ways. For example, they'll talk about the evolution of the phone, how it's changed over the years. And we all know, yes, it's changed. They'll call that evolution. I don't have a problem with that. They want to call that evolution, that's fine. That's not what I'm referring to this evening, and that's not what they're teaching in our school systems, but they use that term that way, and that's fine. I'm also not referring to different breeds of dogs. We got about 350 breeds of dogs on the planet. I'm also not just referring to breeds of cats. I'm also not just referring to different beaks on finches that Darwin got very excited about. These are facts of science. Nobody denies those things. But those things have nothing to do with evolution as they're teaching it in the school system. This is what they're teaching in the school system, and this is what I'm referring to this evening. They tell us 3.8 billion years ago, non-living chemicals came together to form a living cell, and then that living cell turned itself into every other life form on this planet over millions and millions and millions of actually a few billion years. That's what they're teaching as evolution. They're teaching it as a fact, typically. I call it a story, and I'm not trying to be condescending or sarcastic or disrespectful. I'm being literal. It is a story. They weren't there. They didn't see it happen. They're telling a story of what they imagined happened millions of years ago. We also call this molecules to man evolution. I would highly recommend you use that phrase. If you just tell someone you don't believe in evolution, they're going to think you're crazy. Why? Because we see change all the time. What just happened here? It's technically called equivocation. You set two things equal that are not equal. Evolution and change. Now, evolution would involve change, but it's not just any kind of change. It's a very specific kind of change that makes things more complex and adds new information. We never see that kind of change. So if you say you don't believe in evolution, the skeptic will think you deny change, and they're going to think you're crazy, and they should. So don't just say you don't believe in evolution. Say you don't believe in molecules to man evolution. You don't believe that dead, non-living molecules came together to form a living cell, and then that cell turned itself into every other life form, including human beings. You don't believe that story. Now, here's a general premise of this talk. Certain things look pretty good from a certain angle or certain distance, like this bright red BMW. You envision opening the hood and seeing a beautiful engine there. What if you opened the hood and you saw this? The engine's missing. A bunch of wires are hanging there. So what looked pretty good at first, upon closer inspection, doesn't look so good anymore. That's what we're going to see with evolution. And it doesn't take much imagination to envision evolution occurring as they teach it in the school system. You can use your imagination. For example, we've got two creatures here, a snake and a lizard. These two creatures are not completely different. There are a number of similarities there. It doesn't take much imagination to envision bumps starting to form in that snake. And then the bumps get bigger and bigger and bigger and longer, and they kind of evolve into the legs of the lizard. Just small little changes over millions and millions of years. That doesn't take much imagination, and that's, again, what they're teaching in the school. But if you were to pop the hood to look inside these creatures to see what has to happen in the DNA, that's when you find out that can't happen. So we're going to be popping the hood throughout this talk. Richard Dawkins, arguably the world's leading atheist. I like Richard Dawkins. I appreciate his being pretty straightforward. As an atheist, he just says it like it is, and I appreciate that. He probably wouldn't like me, that's fine. But this is one thing that he said: you cannot be both sane and well-educated and disbelieve in evolution. The evidence is so strong that any sane, educated person has got to believe in evolution. Very dogmatic, intimidating statement from a pretty intelligent scientist. So again, imagine your children or grandchildren sitting in a classroom hearing the professor or teacher saying something like this. How are you going to push back? If you say you don't believe in evolution, you're announcing to everyone around you, I'm one of these insane, crazy people. I deny science. I just believe the Bible. So most of the students become very quiet, and right now about 77% of Christian youth are walking away from their faith during college. Even if they don't go to college, about that time in their life they're walking away. Partially because they were handed a set of beliefs without convictions. So that's a whole nother talk that I'm not giving this evening. Proverbs 18:17 says the first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes along and examines him. We've all been in that position before where you hear something and you're thinking, you can't argue with that, but someone else comes along and says, well, wait a minute, did you know about this or that or that? Oh no, I didn't know about that. Okay, I guess this thing doesn't sound so good anymore. Well, I kind of jokingly say Evolution 1:1 says the only one to plead his cause seems right, because no one else is allowed to challenge him or present other views. This is what we have in our public school system. They're only presenting one view. So of course it's going to seem plausible. And if a student raises their hand and says, well, what about creation? Oh, thank you for bringing that up. See, now that's a religious view. And separation of church and state. You're here in the school system to learn truth. This is a science classroom. We're going to teach you what's true. You want to learn about creation, that's a mythical thing. You can read the Bible or something like that, but this is a science class, and we talk about truth. The scientists have proven evolution. If they ever find out there's another option, they'll let us know, but they've already proven evolution is true. That's the mindset in the public school system. Here's an interesting quote from Dr. Eugenie Scott. She's now the former executive director of the National Center for Science Education. This was an organization that was drafted to combat biblical creation. And this is what she said. In my opinion, using creation and evolution topics as critical thinking skills or exercises in primary and secondary schools is virtually guaranteed to confuse the students about evolution and may lead them to reject it. What is she saying? She said, we can't teach both views. That might lead some students to reject evolution. We can't have that. We can't allow that. So we're only going to teach one view. How can you teach critical thinking if you're only giving one option? They have nothing to compare it to. So that's how they get away with it. They're not going to contrast whether things happen by themselves or they didn't. And they could teach it that way. They don't need to teach in the classroom that God created Adam and Eve in the garden and Adam and Eve sinned and got kicked out and all that. But they could teach, you got two options. Either everything came into existence by itself or it didn't. Is that a religious statement? No, that's logic. And then the rest of the semester they can just do good science and the students can decide, does what we just discussed today in class support the idea everything happened by itself or it didn't? They could do that, but they won't. Teaching one view, we know it all happened for no reason all by itself. So we don't have time to go over the big picture. I cover it in some of my other talks, but if we were to touch on the big picture, we would discuss the origin of a bunch of things, like the origin of stuff, matter and energy. Like, okay, where'd stuff come from? There's an entire massive universe out there. Like, if there's no God, please tell me how it came from. I got a series on the origin of the universe you can watch for free. All of our videos are free. So you talk about the origin of stuff, and then once you have the origin of stuff, how does it organize itself into stars, galaxies, and planets? The laws of physics mitigate against that, and once you have stars, galaxies, and planets, how do you get dead chemicals to come together to form a living cell? I think it talks on that as well. And then you talk about the variety of life. Once you have a living cell, how does it turn itself into the millions of species we have today? We're going to focus more so on this last one here, the origin of species, in a sense, the variety of life. How do you take a single-celled organism and turn it into every other life form, including human beings? Well, there's a lot of arranging and storytelling that goes on when teaching evolution. As an analogy, I put 4 modes of transportation up on the screen. We could arrange these things from simpler to more complex and discuss the evolution of the motorcycle. You see what happened? So we used to have tricycles, and then those small little wheels in the back got together to form the larger back wheel of the bicycle. And then the change of the bicycle eventually turned into an electric motor of the scooter. And then the electric motor of the scooter slowly evolved into a gas combustion engine. That's how we got motorcycles. Now, that's a really silly story. But all I did is I took real things and lined them up from what appears to be simpler to more complex, and I told you stories, how little changes here and there over time. That's what happens when they're teaching evolution. Here's a real-life example, the evolution of the horse, from Eohippus all the way to the modern horse. I'm going to give you a quote from Dr. Niles Eldredge, one of the world's leading evolutionists, and take a note who he is. He's the former curator at the American Museum of Natural History. It's his museum. Keep that in mind as we read his quote. I admit that an awful lot has gotten into the textbooks as though it were true. For instance, the most famous example still on exhibit in the American Museum, his museum, is the exhibit on horse evolution. That has been presented as a literal truth in textbook after textbook. Now, I think that that is lamentable, but by the time it filters down to the textbooks, we got a problem. What's he saying? He's saying, we know it never happened, and it probably shouldn't be in the textbooks. Okay, I agree with that. Then why is it in your museum? Well, I mean, it costs money to change the museums. And if you took that out, you'd have this big gaping hole and nothing to put in its place. So they kind of leave it there and imagine the millions of students and adults filing through, seeing fossils lined up like the bike and the trike and all that, with little plaques with the stories. So this changed into that. It's like, you can't argue with that. That's science, right? No, that's pictures and little words making up stories. But it's in the museums. The Book of Life, written by Stephen Jay Gould. He was one of the world's leading evolutionists, passed away, I think maybe in 2007 or something. But this is what he illustrated in this book, how fish evolved into amphibians over millions and millions of years. Okay, what did it look like in the middle? This is like a missing link, a transitional form. I was giving this very talk at a state university, and when I got to this slide, a student stood up and he said, "They found the missing link, it's Tiktaalik." I said, "Thank you for mentioning that," and I clicked Tiktaalik. And I said, "Yep, they found Tiktaalik, the missing link, and it's proof of evolution." No, they found a fossil that they had never seen before. They already had a lineup. So you look at a new fossil, where would this visually seem to fit? Oh, we'll put it there. Hey, we have proof of evolution. No, it's just a creature we haven't seen before. It's already been disqualified. I don't have time to go into reasons why, but they know that no, it doesn't really qualify as a missing link. They just found it and put it in the lineup and told more stories. It's not proof of evolution. But doing something like that is not much different than doing something like this, talking about how an Etch-a-Sketch evolved into an iPad. These two things, these objects, don't look completely different. There are some similarities there. So use your imagination. What might it have looked like over millions of years in between? Maybe something like this. A little bit like one, a little bit like the other. But you know, there's no way the complex, or the simple workings of an Etch-a-Sketch could ever turn into a complex thing like an iPad on its own over time. It's not going to happen because of what would have to go on inside. So, how do we make that transition from a single cell all the way to a human being? Well, when we reproduce, our kids don't look exactly like us. There might be some similarities. They might end up having the same hair color and eye color, but they don't look identical to us. Changes occur. Changes do happen. And there are two types of changes. We have built-in variation and random mutation. The built-in variation has to do with the genes in our DNA. We've studied DNA for quite a while, and we have a pretty good idea what these genes do. The random mutations, those are copying errors, random copying errors. We don't know what to expect with that because they're random. We're going to talk about both of these types of changes quickly here. Built-in variation, here's an example. We have two medium-length furred dogs up here, and they each have two copies of a gene that makes fur length. Why do they have two copies? Because they got one from mom and one from dad. Each passed one on, so they got a copy from mom and dad, and they apparently have one gene that makes long fur, the L, and one that makes short fur, the S. So those genes combined in their bodies, those dogs have medium length fur. If you breed these two dogs, they will each pass on one of those two genes. They don't get to pick and choose, oh, I think I'll do this one. No, just one goes or the other. If they both pass on a gene for short fur, the puppy will come out with short fur. It doesn't have an option. It doesn't matter which of those two genes gets expressed in its body, or even if those genes would combine, it's going to have short fur. If they both pass on a gene for long fur, the puppy comes out with long fur. If one passes on a gene for long fur, the other for short, the puppy can come out with long fur, short fur, or medium length fur if they combine. It gives you a variety of fur length. Genes don't just do fur length, they do other things too. Give us big dogs, little dogs, long ears, short ears. All the features we see on dogs, they're pre-coded in the genes. We know how that works. Now, if you look at these two sets of animals, set A and B, which set of animals looks more like each other? It's pretty obvious. Animals in set A look a lot more like each other than those in set B. And why is that? Because they're the same kind of animal. In Genesis, 10 times in the first chapter, it says God created creatures to reproduce after their kind. Yeah, they can do a variety, but always within distinct limits after their kind. In fact, you can breed dogs, dingoes, coyotes, and wolves. They can all breed together. Look at them. Do they look like completely different creatures? No, they're very similar creatures. So you can breed a dog and a wolf, and you get a wolf dog. That's not a surprise. It looks a little bit like the dog, a little bit like the wolf. This is what we expect from genetics, and this is what Scripture tells us to expect. But you can't breed a wolf and a dog and get an ostrich. Why? Because they don't have genetic information to make beaks and feathers. So you can get a variety, but it's always going to be within limits. You can also breed a zebra and a donkey, and you get a zonkey. It sounds kind of funny, but this is real life, real science. Why, are those two creatures completely different? No, they're basically the same, but one has a nice paint job. You can also breed a lion and a tiger, and you get a liger. Why? Because they're both large cats. So they can breed together, but you can't breed a lion and a kangaroo to get a lion-garoo. That one's not going to happen because they're not the same creature. There are a bunch of other creatures you're also not going to get. It would be these here. That's what happens when you have Photoshop and too much time on your hands, of which I have neither. But I mean, seriously, they're funny because you know that can't happen. And scientists know that can't happen. Scripture knows that can't happen. We've known that for a long time. You can't breed creatures that are not the same kind. So that was the built-in variation. Now we're going to take a look at the random mutation, these accidental copying errors in the DNA. We are now magically transformed from a church into a state university. Biology classroom, and I am the PhD biology professor, and I'm going to teach you how evolution works. So you have an organism here, and it's going to reproduce. So it copies its DNA and it makes children. The children look pretty much like the parents because it's a copy of the same DNA. The children reproduce and make grandchildren, which look pretty much like the parents and the grandparents because, again, it's a copy of the same DNA. Then the grandchildren reproduce, and we got some significant mutations going on here. Apparently some of them are bad and some are good. But then natural selection comes along like a superhero and wipes out those bad changes. It just keeps the good ones. And now the new good organisms, they continue to reproduce, make more of the new ones, and the original ones continue to reproduce and make more of those. And that process continues on for millions and millions and millions of years. Can you imagine the great variety of creatures we would have on this planet through a process like that? Now, I guarantee you the non-Christian students sitting in a classroom hearing that, they say to themselves, you can't argue with that. I mean, this is my PhD biology professor. He knows what he's talking about. This is science. This is facts. This is not that mythical Bible stuff. That's what the non-Christians conclude. Guess what? Most of the Christians conclude the same thing because it makes sense. I mean, you can't argue about it. This is science. I mean, this is like true stuff where the Bible is more of a touchy-feely thing and it can be whatever you want, right? So they go with this. And they usually end up walking away from their faith. Why do they even need the Bible at all anymore if science can tell you truth? So they walk away. Well, we are now going to take a closer look at mutations, and we're going to do what Paul Harvey used to do and look at the rest of the story. Can mutations actually do what they tell us? And you're going to find out, ain't no way. I'm going to make three major points about mutations. First of all, they're random, purposeless, and undirected. They're occurring in the DNA, and they're almost all detrimental or bad. We'll go through each one of those really quick here. Number one, they're random and purposeless, basically. Here's a quote from Nova Online. This is a secular source talking about mutations. It's sometimes convenient when trying to make sense of evolution to think of changes within a species as having a purpose, as though Mother Nature has some intended goal that she sets out to achieve. The bacteria want to survive, someone might reason when thinking about the declining effects of antibiotics, and so they evolve into resistant strains. Of course, there is no purpose in evolution, just random mutations within DNA, most of which are detrimental to the survivability of the organism. Those are the 3 points I just mentioned on my previous slide. I actually made the other slide, and then I found this quote, and it's like, that's cool. They're backing up the points that I'm making here. But then you look at the popular literature, like Discover News, talking about dinosaurs. Presumably, the sauropods evolved large body size as a strategy to deter predators. Well, what are they saying? It's something like this. Apparently, at some point in the past, dinosaurs weren't as large as they eventually came to be. So they're sitting around the fire one night and they're saying, hey, you guys, we need to come up with a strategy to deter our predators or we're going to go extinct much sooner than we're supposed to. You have any ideas? And they say, no, our brains are too small. And then one of them says, I got an idea. What if, when our predators come after us, we get some machine guns out, we could shoot them? The lead dinosaur says, no, we can't do that because they haven't been invented yet. Okay, good point. Second dinosaur says, I know, what if when they come after us, we just hop onto our Harleys and ride off into the sunset? And the lead dinosaur says, no, they haven't been invented yet either, okay? Third dinosaur says, I got an idea. What if, just what if we evolve like super huge body sizes, we could scare them away? And then the lead dinosaur says, no, that's a good idea. Is everyone in agreement? Yeah, okay, break. And they go off and they get big. There's not a scientist on this planet who believes that. An atheistic evolutionist does not believe that scenario. They don't believe creatures decided they needed something, so they evolved it. But the popular literature will give you that impression, like the fish. You see, they were swimming around in the oceans for millions of years, but food started to become scarce, so they needed to evolve lungs to get up onto land to find new sources of food, so they evolved lungs. Guess what the students do in that class? They write that down, because that's what the professor just said. I mean, these fish, they got to do something or they're going to go extinct. Wait a minute, how do fish know what lungs are? I know they swim around in schools, but I mean, how would they know? They wouldn't even know what a lung is. Even if they knew, what are they going to do about it? They only have genetic information to make fish parts. And even somehow, when they're reproducing, they're making random copying errors. What do they do when they're somewhere in the middle? They can't breathe underwater anymore, but they can't get up on land and breathe air yet. They're dead. It's not going to work that way. But that's what's taught in the textbooks. You just have to imagine how the fish acquired lungs, and this, they evolved it. They use these phrases. They acquired this, they got that, they developed this. Like, how? How do they acquire lungs? You know, when they talk about the details are absent. So, that was the fact that their purpose isn't random. Now we're going to talk about DNA very briefly here, that these mutations are happening in the DNA. DNA is like a very, 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 very complex blueprint with lots and lots and lots and lots of information in it. So let's temporarily talk about storage capacity of DNA. Imagine you're holding a teaspoon from your kitchen and it's filled with your DNA. How much information could you fit in a teaspoon's amount of DNA? Well, we back up our computers, right, in case they crash. So let's say you want to back up a teaspoon amount of your DNA. Well, let's say you want to put it on a 64 gig thumb drive. 64 gigs pretty big for a thumb drive. You could fit almost 1 million pages of information on a 64 gig thumb drive. That's a lot of space. A lot of information could be stored there. So how much of that thumb drive would be filled up from just a teaspoon amount of your DNA? Well, it would fill that whole thumb drive up. In fact, you'd need more than one thumb drive. How many would you need? 1,000? Wow, that would be really impressive. It's not true. How about 1 million? Wow, that would just blow you away, right? That's not really even true. Someone would have to give you 1 million thumb drives every day for 139 years. Then you'd have enough storage space to back up the amount of information that can be stored in a teaspoon amount of your DNA. Oh, but that all happened by accident. Particles were banging together over history and we got DNA. My faith isn't strong enough to believe that one. DNA is like the coiled up ladder, you know that. It's like a set of encyclopedias, and if you're under 20 years old, that's what encyclopedias look like. They're like books. I don't know if you heard a book or not. So DNA is like a set of encyclopedia, and the rungs, those are called nucleotides. So the rungs on the ladder are called nucleotides. It's like a single letter out of that whole set of encyclopedias. And if you put a whole bunch of rungs together, a whole bunch of letters together, that's how you make words. And if you put thousands of these rungs or nucleotides together, that's how you make a chapter in the set of encyclopedias. And a chapter is equivalent to like what we would call a gene, the genes that you have in your DNA. And then if you put thousands of genes or thousands of chapters together, that's how you get a single volume, one of the books of that whole set, which is also what we call a chromosome. And then when you look at the entire genome, all of the DNA, that's like the entire set of encyclopedias. For humans, we call it the human genome. That's a little biology 101. Many of you probably already knew that already, but just some basic stuff. Now we're going to get into this last point, and it's going to start to get much, much more interesting. These mutations, these copying errors, when things reproduce, they're making mistakes in their existing information, they're almost entirely detrimental or bad. So again, here's the story of evolution. Let's say you had a biochemistry textbook. It's very technical. It's got a lot of information in it. The amount of information in a single-celled organism is about equivalent to an entire biochemistry textbook. So there are no simple cells. That's a lot of information in that single cell there. But remember, we need to turn that cell all the way into a human being. Human beings are much more complex than a single cell. So how do you do that? Well, here's a book that was produced from the Bioinformatics Symposium at Cornell. They put all the papers together and produced a book. Here's one of the pages. Don't worry about reading all that right now, but I've highlighted a certain section. I'm going to put that off to the side here. If we had this book and we copied that book over and over and over, millions of years from now, we would just have a lot of that book. It wouldn't be anything else. It would be that book, lots of copies. If we want to take that book and make it much better and more complex, we can't just copy it. We'd have to make some changes. Well, what changes are available to evolution? The mutations that we've been talking about. Mutations are these accidental copying errors. Oops, oops, oops. So let's take a look at what a copying error looks like. The first one is called a duplication error. A duplication mutation. So I took the word level up there and I added an extra L at the end. It doesn't spell level anymore. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you were reading that, you'd think, well, it's level. It's a typo, and you'd move on. That's not how our genes work. If our genes saw that, it'd be like, I don't know what this is, and it would move on. You just destroy that piece of information by duplicating a letter. Then we have a deletion mutation. Take the word model and take the M out. It doesn't spell model anymore. Then we have a substitution mutation. We take the P out of probability and put a Z in there instead. Doesn't spell probability. These are called single point mutations. This is what mutations look like. Now, here's what's interesting. You could ask a 6-year-old child, hey, what's your favorite book? And then they tell you some book. You say, if we took your book, closed our eyes, opened it up to some random page, stuck our finger in there, whatever letter we touch, we add an extra one of those right there. Then we close our eyes again, open up to another page, stick our finger in there, and whatever letter we touch, we erase that letter. Then we do it again, and whatever letter we touch, we take that letter out and put a different letter in, or maybe a number instead. If we keep doing that to your book, what will happen to it? Will it get better and better and more exciting and new characters and all that? The 6-year-old will tell you no. It'll get worse and worse. In fact, pretty soon I won't even be able to read it. A 6-year-old understands this. You have to be highly educated to not get this. And that's what happens with many of these PhD scientists. They're brilliant, but they either don't know about this or they don't want to think about it because it's so straightforward. How do you make these random changes and make life forms better and better and better over millions of years? It's not going to work. But as challenging as anything that I might have shared has been so far, the challenge for evolution gets much worse. This is where business picks up. If you've been bored out of your skull so far, this is where it gets fun. This is the best part of this talk. This is the things that's going to make you smile, and you'll be able to easily share this with other people. I've given this talk many times. I have yet to ever have one single skeptic come up to me afterwards and talk about anything that I shared. They'll come up all upset. Well, what about all the evil in the world? So that's a great question. I can address that, but could you first address why I was here this evening, the presentation I gave? Well, what about carbon-14 dating? That's another great question. I'd love to answer that, but could you maybe address like the whole DNA thing? Well, what about they won't talk about it. There is nothing to say about what you're about to hear, and it's super easy, super simple. It's not technical. It has to do with what we call information structure. How is the information written on our DNA? When you find out, that's when you'll easily understand evolution is not possible. So let's say you're looking at a segment of your DNA and you're reading it and it spells, was it a rat I saw? Kind of a weird statement. In English, we read from left to right. But you may have already noticed you can also read that backwards. Was it a rat I saw? It's called a palindrome. Kind of fun. Not a very meaningful sentence, but you can read it forwards and backwards. Pretty fun. This is what we've discovered about our DNA. Much of it can not only be read forwards, it can also be read backwards. But guess what? the challenge for evolution gets worse, and the evidence of design gets better and better, because our DNA doesn't have messages that read the same thing forwards and backwards like that example. It's more like this. Take a look at the word desserts. You spell that backwards, it spells stress, which is what I get when I don't get dessert. So we have two pieces of information. You get one piece when you read it one way, another piece when you read it the other way. But again, picture this in our DNA. We can't just keep it there. We got to make this better and better and better and better. And the only thing that is available to an evolutionist is copying errors. So let's make a mutation here. We'll just delete the T randomly. It doesn't spell desserts, but it also doesn't spell stressed. One change messed up two messages, because it messed up the one way, and when you read it backwards, it messed up that message too. But we don't have little words in our DNA that go forwards and backwards. We have up to entire chapters of complex instructions you can read both forwards and backwards. Let me give you an analogy to keep this simple. Let's say you all have a job working for a cell phone company, and it's your training to write the instruction manual to give to the manufacturing plant so they can make the phones. That's what you do. Your boss comes to you one day and says, hey, I got a project for you. I need you to write the chapter in the manual that explains how the phone's going to download apps from the web. You say, yeah, I can do that. He says, thanks. And he's walking away, and kind of like Columbo, he goes, I just want one more thing. When you write that chapter, you have to write it in such a way that if we read your chapter backwards, it will explain how the phone's going to play music files. And you start laughing, you say, oh, that's a good one, boss. And your boss says, no, I'm serious. We only have so much room in the manual. Your complex chapter of instructions has to make perfect sense forwards and backwards. That is humanly impossible. It cannot be done, not even close. You can't even program a computer to do that. I did programming for 12 years. It cannot be done. But this is what we're seeing in our DNA. You read a segment one direction, and it's a set of very complex instructions that code to make specific proteins that carry out a certain function in your body. Now you read that section backwards, it's a completely different set of instructions coding to make completely different proteins that carry out a completely different function in your body. Two major points with this. Number one, particles banging together in nature, which is what evolution is. There's no purpose. They're just kind of interacting. Could never create a complex information system you could read both forwards and backwards. And secondly, even if you had something like that, making random changes to it will not make it better and better. It's going to make it worse and worse. That's so easy to understand. But guess what? It gets even better than that. We have overlapping information in our DNA. Take a look at this weird phrase, I like chocolate later that evening. Why is it weird? Because it's two phrases that overlap. I like chocolate, which is true, and then later that evening. It overlaps in the middle, L-A-T-E. It shares those words. Overlapping messages. All right, again, we have to improve this. We got to make it better and better over time. Let's introduce one of our wonderful mutations. We'll take the E out and put a Z in. It doesn't spell I like chocolate, and it doesn't spell later that evening. One random change messed up two messages because they overlap. We don't have a few letters that overlap in our DNA. We have up to entire chapters that overlap each other. Can you imagine? 2 chapters in a book, you start reading from here to there, and it's one chapter, and then you start from here to there, and it's another chapter, and they actually overlap each other. That's what we have in our DNA. But guess what? It gets even better than that. We have spliced information in our DNA. Look at the same phrase I had up before. I like chocolate later that evening. Let's underline a few segments and then bring them down below. And it spells I like her hat. That's a spliced message. We took a few random things out of the main message, put them together, and we got an additional piece of information. This is what we see in our DNA. We have spliced messages. Again, we need a random mutation to make this better. We'll just randomly delete the H. It doesn't spell I like chocolate, but it also doesn't spell I like her hat. One change messed up 2 messages. But we don't have just a few letters that get spliced in our DNA. We have up to long sentences and short paragraphs. As an analogy, let's say you were reading the biochemistry textbook from cover to cover. It's very technical. You just learned a lot of information. Now go back and take random sentences and short paragraphs from throughout the book, put them together. Oh, we got another chapter. You couldn't write a book to do that, but that's what we see in our DNA. And guess what? It gets even better than that. We have embedded messages in our DNA. So take a look at this sentence. Can you show Mike Owen checks from Oliver's latest facts and set it on the desk? Let's circle every 8th letter and then bring them down below. And it spells chocolate. There's a theme going on here. It's my talk. I can do that. But again, we need a random mutation to make things better and better. So we'll just randomly delete the H. It messed up the main sentence up there, didn't it? But now it's going to mess up the embedded message because all of the letters after that letter we deleted, they're going to shift over one spot. And now it spells this, which is meaningless. One random change messed up the main message, and it also messed up the embedded message. And this is what we have in our DNA. There's embedded messages like that. It's amazing. But guess what? It gets even better than that. We have encrypted messages. I actually had 3 interviews with the CIA to work in their cryptographic analysis division. A creepy story for some other time. It was kind of weird. But encrypting messages, coding and decoding messages. This is how it works. We have this phrase, kind of meaningless, jumbled letters going across the screen. Doesn't seem to have any meaning. But what if you found out there was an encryption key? Meaning everywhere there's an H up there, it's really an A. Everywhere there's a B, it's really a C. Everywhere there's a Y, it's a T. So if you make all the substitutions, it actually spells this as an encrypted message. That's one way of doing data encryption. It's very complex. There are other methods as well. But let's take a minute to think through what would be required in nature to create an encrypted message system, keeping in mind there's no God, no creator, no designer. Particles are just banging together. You got a big bang with some hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium, and these particles are banging together, and billions of years later we got encrypted message systems. What would these particles have to do banging into each other? This is what they would need to do. First of all, they would have to create and develop a language system using symbols. So these particles would have to decide, if we have 3 sticks like this and put them together this way, we're going to call that an A. And if we have 3 shapes like that and put them together this way, we're going to call that a B. They would have to create an entire alphabet by particles banging together randomly over time. Then they would have to create and define words. So when they put those 4 letters together, it's going to represent that object. They would have to create an entire dictionary and definitions by particles banging together over time. Then they'd have to be able to write meaningful sentences and paragraphs, which requires rules of grammar. How do particles banging together create rules of grammar? Then you have to create the encryption key, like I mentioned. After that, you'd have to create a system to do the coding and the decoding. And then you'd have to create the ability, develop the ability to read and carry out these instructions, or the whole thing is useless. Again, there's not a scientist on the planet who can even begin to explain how particles could do any of that, let alone all of it. Yet this is in our DNA, and one last time, it gets even better than that. I'm skipping a few details. You can thank me for that later. There's 3D information. It's actually 4D information, which has to do with time. I'm skipping that one. 3D information in our DNA. This is a little bit harder to depict with PowerPoint, but I'll do my best. When our DNA makes proteins, they're not these little mini ladders. They're these highly, highly complex 3-dimensional folds. If they don't get folded just right, they're useless. And then they're decomposed. Individual components are reused. So it's got to be folded just right, and it's unbelievably complex process. I wish I could show you a video right now of all that goes on. It would blow you away. But proteins are these complex folds, like a lock and a key. It's got to be just right to work. So I put 7 words up here on the screen, kind of random words, and I'm going to fold the words. But all I can do in PowerPoint is stack them on top of each other. So when I stack those words on top of each other that way, you may notice going up and down now, you see an additional piece of information, an additional word that shows up, the word success. Well, obviously, if we delete letters and change letters, we're going to mess that up. But if we don't fold it right, if we do this, we lose that piece of information. And that's what's happening with our DNA. We got all these other levels of information I mentioned, but then you also have some nucleotides, those rungs on the ladder here, some other rungs here. When this gets folded over, now they're on top of each other and you could read it up and down. It's additional information. It's unbelievably complex. So wrapping this up, certain things look pretty good from a certain distance or a certain angle, like the bright red BMW. We envisioned opening that hood to see the beautiful engine. We just opened the engine on evolution, or the hood on evolution, and the engine's missing. There's nothing there. Here's a quote from a geneticist. He said, genetics has no proofs for evolution. It has trouble explaining it. The closer one looks at the evidence for evolution, the less one finds of substance. In fact, the theory keeps on postulating evidence and failing to find it, moves on to other postulates, fossil missing links, natural selection of improved forms, positive mutations, etc. This is not science. One last quote from some of you may have heard of before. God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God is the one who created everything. His fingerprints are all over it. And if what I just presented as evidence for design doesn't count as evidence for purpose or design or God, please give me an example of what you would accept as evidence. I've asked skeptics that very question. They'll come up to me, there's no evidence that God exists or that creation is true. I ask them a simple question, very respectfully. They say, okay, tell me, what would you accept as evidence for design or creation? What would that look like? If you saw A, B, or C, that would definitely be evidence. Well, I don't know, but I know there's no evidence. Wait a minute. If by your own admission you don't even know what the evidence would look like, how do you know it doesn't exist? In fact, if you don't have criteria that you use to judge what counts and what doesn't, you can't even have this conversation. So they will make bold claims with nothing to back it up. They say the evidence doesn't exist, but they can't even tell you what it is they would expect to see. I expect to see this. If I saw it, I would say there's a God, but I don't see it. They can't even describe what it is. If this, what I just presented, does not count as evidence of design, give me an example of something that does. They would look at their laptop and they would say, of course it's designed. Why? Because you have all these independent parts that are really complex on their own, and they're arranged in such a way they can perform a function that's outside of themselves by working together. That's evidence of design. We don't question that. We have criteria. We understand that. So then when you look at DNA, which blows this laptop away, why wouldn't they say that's evidence of design? You know why? Because it's a heart issue. It's not an academic debate. They don't want to see evidence of design because if there's a designer, he would be the ultimate authority. They don't like that. So even though this is powerful evidence, do not be naive thinking if you just tell your atheist neighbor this, you'll say, oh, I didn't know that. Let me go to church and worship Jesus with you. You'll probably change the subject. Why is there all the violence in the world? Why does God allow evil? And did people really live to be 900 years old? It's like, what? Those are good questions, but we were talking about evidence and nature of design, and they can't address that. You're taking their argument away, so they just got to change the subject. So be careful with this. This is really more for you to strengthen your faith, to in turn and go out and share the gospel message, which is what they really need to hear. Knowing if they ask you tough questions, you know answers exist, even if you don't have them memorized. You can get back to them, but you also want to make sure that if they're asking you a question, that the answer matters. Because sometimes you get back to them with an answer, well, I don't care about it, what about this? And then you get an answer later, well, I don't care about that, what about this other thing? They just have you chasing your tail. Now, if they really struggle and they don't think there's evidence of design, you could share these things, and if they're truly open, they might say, wow, I didn't know that. I got some thinking to do. I'm not going to change my mind instantly right now, but that was interesting. Thanks for sharing it. I'll get back to you, which is fine. They didn't get to where they are overnight. They're not going to become a Christian overnight, generally speaking. Can happen, but anyway, so wrapping this up, that's evolution probable or problematic. We will do just a few minutes of Q&A, and just before we do, I will highlight the resources that we have. Everything we have, I think, is on our table out there. It's also available online, and we call these our free sources because almost everything we have now is free. We currently have 34 free streaming videos, including what you just saw. This exact talk is available online. You can watch for free. There's other talks on the flood, on evidence for the inspiration of the Bible, dinosaurs in the Bible, the origin of the universe, pro-life, just lots of topics, all free. Every time I record a new one, We add it to the list. You can watch them all free, so you can go to our website, click on streaming videos. It'll take you to our YouTube channel. Podcast, already mentioned those. We have over 100 that are out now. You can go to Spotify or Apple, or you can go just right to our website and click, and it'll take you there to listen to them. And again, every Friday another one will come out. And I've been interviewing a lot of interesting people. Hopefully in the next few months I'll interview the world's leading researcher on the origin of life. He was a very strong Christian, brilliant scientist. I'm also going to be interviewing the world's leading researcher on the resurrection, Gary Habermas, and others. So all these really top leading scientists and people, you'll be able to hear from them as well. I read an email newsletter, monthly email newsletter. You can sign up at our table or right from our website. It just comes out once a month. Has a lot of interesting stuff in it, including a question of the month article that I write. I write a brief article to help you think a little bit deeper in your faith. It's always kind of intriguing. Those are featured in the email newsletter. And then we also archive them on our website, so you can go read all the past ones. There's lots of those available. I did some live stream broadcasts. Some of those are on the website. And then I have a little pocket guide. We have a few at the table out there, a limited supply. But there are 4 major evidences for the inspiration of the Bible. I'll actually be doing that at Cornerstone Sunday morning, that talk on evidence for the inspiration of the Bible. But this little pocket guide lists 4 categories of evidence and 1 example evidence in each category. So the next time someone says, oh, the Bible's just full of errors and contradictions, it's not the Word of God, you could say, no, I actually believe it is the inspired Word of God, and here are 4 strong reasons why to get you started. So those are available on the table. Those are all of our free resources. The only thing we sell are the 3 books that I wrote, because it costs us a lot of money to print them, produce them, and ship them, but we've greatly reduced the price. Other people are increasing their prices in their books to cover their costs. They're just like, this is God's ministry. $30, you can get all 3 books. The book I wrote on creation, I've been told by some of the world's leading scientists, I think it's the best overview that's out there, which I was honored to hear. And I'm not traveling around to try to raise support. Been speaking 40 years, have never charged a penny, never will. The way our ministry works is through monthly supporters, and when people become a monthly supporter, then we give them the books free. So then everything is free. And I already mentioned the Grand Canyon tours. Brochures are back there. So with that, we'll do a few minutes of Q&A. You can ask any question you want. It doesn't have to be related to something I directly shared. It can be something else. I'm going to work really hard to be relatively brief in answering the questions so we can get to as many as we can in a few minutes. So.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's give him a hand. Lots of information, so I'm sure it generated some questions too. So if you have a question, I'll bring the microphone around so people can hear the question as well as the answer. Yeah, one back here.
Hi, I just wanted to mention that 2016, in a meeting of the Royal Society in London, they came to the conclusion that current neo-Darwinism is, they need a new theory. They said, you know what, this doesn't work. So there are, some people are starting to realize that that it doesn't hold any water. So maybe there's hope for them.
Yeah, there are a lot of scientists, up until relatively recently, most scientists were pretty quiet. A lot of individual scientists doubted evolution, but they've said, I don't dare admit that publicly because I'll lose my job. I won't be able to teach. I won't be able to get grant money. I won't be able to get my research published. So they just live with the idea that evolution is kind of crazy, but hey, we live with that. But more recently, more and more scientists are saying this just doesn't work. Now, I think going forward, more and more secular scientists, including atheists, are going to come to the belief that life in this universe was designed. However, most of them won't go to say it's the God of the Bible. They're going to say, I guess there is some kind of a spiritual force out there, or other gods, or aliens, because they don't want it to be the God of the Bible, because that's too guilting in their lives. They can't do what they want. They don't like the moral implications of that. But they won't be able to fight the evidence of design that this world is not an accident. So they'll agree with design, but they won't want it to be the God of the Bible, so they'll start to veer off. They'll become more and more spiritual, but it won't be Christianity. So we kind of need to keep that in mind. I think intelligent design research is awesome, but it doesn't take you far enough. It just gets you to there must be something out there, which could be aliens. It intelligent design could end with aliens. Intelligent aliens, well, where do the aliens come from and all that. But yeah, it's more scientists are starting to realize this. The science does not back up Darwinism or even neo-Darwinism.
Two quick questions. One, any chance you're going to get Richard Dawkins on your podcast? That would be a good one. And then the other one is, you kind of just touched on it there, but the new hot topic right now, of course, is aliens and stuff. Do you have anything that you talk about on that, or any way that you address that, or do you?
Okay, the second one I think was about like aliens. If I got it right, I'm getting echo up here. The first one is I heard you talk about my podcast, but I wasn't sure what the question was.
Yeah, I was just curious if you could ever get Richard Dawkins on your podcast.
Oh, do I hear other people
Dawkins?
talking about it, or should I explain more about my podcast?
No. Dawkins, you know.
Oh, Dawkins.
Yeah, any chance he could be on your podcast?
Oh, I would love to have Dawkins or any skeptics. In fact, I'll try to make this short. I did a radio interview in San Diego, and it was a Christian radio station. They wanted to interview me, but they said, we also want to bring an atheist in. And he's the head of the Atheist Association, San Diego, super sharp guy. But they said he's really nice too, but we want to have him sit right next to you. He can chime in anytime he wants and ask you any question he wants. And I was like, okay. I'd never done that before, and I probably didn't tell you this, but I'm human. And there's a little bit of pride there. I was like, God, I don't want to look foolish on live radio in case he throws something at me and I'm not quick enough. I hadn't done that before, but so I agreed. I went in, met the atheist. He was friendly. The program started, and his name was Sean. And I said, hey, Sean, I don't know too many Christians who would go on an atheist radio program, so this is pretty cool. You, an atheist, are here on a Christian radio program. I was affirming him for being there, and I give my wife credit for that. She's helped me do a lot more listening and follow-up questions and affirming the skeptic for something positive before you just try to tell them why they're wrong. It's so important. So I affirmed Sean for being there. The interview went really well. I'm going to skip the details. It went really well for me. Afterwards, he wanted to go out for dinner. And I said, oh, I would love to, but I said I have to drive up to Escondido. I have dinner with 5 other guys I always meet with when I'm out here. But if I ever come back, I'd love to get together. Well, I'm giving you the short version. 6 months later, someone flew me out to speak in Southern California. I emailed Sean. I said, hey, I'm coming back out. Are you still willing to get together? He goes, yeah, we could do another radio interview. And I said, nope. No microphones, no cameras, no lights. You and me shooting the breeze. I said, I want to get to know why you're an atheist. I said, I know what atheism is. I want to hear your story. I don't even think I'll talk about myself or Christianity. I want to get to know you better. It's like, okay. We got together for just over 3 hours over lunch. And about a half an hour into it, he said, this is awesome. I wish we could do this every day. And I said, me too, but you live in San Diego. I live in the Milwaukee area. We had a really interesting conversation. To save time, I can't go through a lot of it. But it was very cordial. A brilliant guy, really is, and pretty nice guy. We were just talking. He wasn't mad at me. I wasn't mad at him. But I did challenge him. And again, if you want to talk to me afterwards sometime and give you a little more detail, but what I did was I temporarily assumed he was correct in his view. And then I just took that and showed him how his view leads to logical absurdities. So he either has to live with all those logical absurdities or say, maybe there's something wrong about my belief system. Just one, and this isn't even the best one, I've got to keep it short. I said, you're an atheist, right? Yep. I said, so you reject God, right? Yep. I said, no, you don't. He said, what are you talking about? I said, you can't reject God. You're just particles. Because he already admitted he's just particles, matter and energy. There's no soul in him, spirit, or anything like that. He's just particles. But he claims he rejects God. I said, no, you don't reject God. You're just particles. Particles don't reject anything. They just bang together. So you can't reject God. At the same time, my particles are moving in such a way that it makes me think there is a God. He has a son named Jesus Christ, and I have a personal relationship with him. And you can't change that because that's just my particles. He had already admitted he doesn't control his particles. They just move and stuff happens. So in me, my particles are moving, and I just happen to believe there is a God, and I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and you can't change it because that's how particles are moving. I did a bunch of things like that were just making his head spin in a fun way, but just saying your worldview doesn't work. It doesn't. I got to get back to the question here. There's lots of other things I can share right now, but I got to get back to the question. So I would love to have Dawkins on my podcast. I'm actually praying about it. You can pray for me. I've lost contact with Sean, but I'd love to maybe interview him on my podcast and say, Sean, the stage is yours. Tell my audience about atheism. From you, you're an expert in it, because a lot of people have wrong ideas of what atheism is. Tell my audience all about it, and I'm not going to be pushing back. I might ask you some clarification questions, but you have the time. I would also want them to know in further episodes, I will say, hey, remember when Sean was on? That was so cool that he was willing to come on here. I really appreciate him. Great guy. We're just going to discuss some of the things that he described, and then I would just discuss the things, not him. And if he's willing to do that, I'd love to have him on. So that would be kind of fun. So yeah, having people like that on would be fun. And then the other question I've all of a sudden forgot. The second question was related to aliens. Yes. Long story short, tomorrow morning I'm giving 2 talks at the conference, and the second one is top 10 questions. One is there life in outer space? I'll give you the short answer. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go to the conference, but is there life in outer space? First question, what do you mean by life? Are you talking about like bacteria or aliens? If you're wondering about bacteria, which most people aren't thinking about that, if you're just saying bacteria, my answer is I don't know. How could I know there's no bacterial life anywhere else in the universe? There's no evidence of it. Probabilistically, no, and there's, again, no evidence for it, but I suppose God could have created some bacteria in some other galaxy. Why? We wouldn't ever even know about it, but I guess it's possible. I don't think so, but it's possible. How about aliens flying spaceships? My personal answer is no. For 2 reasons. One is you can read the Bible from cover to cover, and you should. There is absolutely nothing in the Bible that even hints that God created life anywhere else in the universe outside of this planet in the 6 days. So if you want to believe in aliens, that's fine, but you cannot claim biblical support for it. And secondly, I don't know of any scientific evidence of aliens out there, and even the secular scientists admit they basically got 0 to this point. They're going to keep looking because they think if life evolved here, it probably evolved somewhere else too. And lastly, so we've had these radio telescopes aimed into outer space. Carl Sagan started with that many years ago. Spent a lot of our tax dollars trying to see signals coming from outer space. Someone asked him, how are you going to know if these signals are coming from intelligent life? He says it's easy. If there's any pattern or any complexity, we'll know that had to have come from intelligent life because that wouldn't happen by accident. He could look at his own DNA, which blows that away, and say, well, the DNA is an accident. And last thing, we've been waiting for signals to come to us. Someone said, we can do that, but why don't we be proactive and send our own signals out trying to reach life out there? Like, you probably don't want to do it in English, but they're sending coded information, and guess what one of the messages that we are sending out to outer space in case there's intelligent life out there? Help, we're struggling with climate change. Yeah. So anyway.
Okay, another question here.
I had a couple of questions, clarification questions on the DNA mutations. To read it forward and backward, so it couldn't be a singular mutation, it'd have to be a double mutation and go back and forth to be read. Not only in that way, but linear, and you had several, like, had a hard time keeping up with basically 3 different ways that the singular mutation would have to happen in such a way to be read in multiple different ways. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, if I understand your question right, you have all that complex information.
Yeah.
You've got normal stuff like you would read in a book. You read it one direction, you're done. You got that. Yep. You also have it reading it backwards. You also have it overlapping. You also have it spliced, embedded, encrypted, 3D, all that's in there. So when you go to make one change, if it's in a section that overlaps, you're messing up the overlap stuff. Yeah. If it's in a section that reads forwards and backwards, you're messing that up. Right. If it's in this folded thing, you're messing that up. So one change can mess up multiple things. That's why it's dangerous today to even do some of the genetic modification stuff, because you might make a change that seems to improve this one output. But that section you changed might also be used somewhere else that you're not aware of, and it really messes that up. And we don't find that out for 10 years, and all of a sudden we got all these diseases. So it potentially can be really dangerous. It's like working with computer programming code. I did that for 12 years, And anytime someone gave me an old program to look at, I was fearful of changing some code to fix this thing because that code might be used somewhere else too. Because I know how that works. So I told them, I said, I don't want to put Band-Aids on some old program. Let me program it from scratch and do it right from the get-go. So that's why these mutations are so potentially dangerous.
Yeah, the math seems crazy on that. And then the other question I had is, they just tested the Shroud of Turin again, and they found Jewish blood DNA in there. Have you been aware of the new results from that, the Shroud of Turin? Are you aware of that?
So it's weird, the speaker system is odd up here. You said something about Jewish...
The Shroud of Turin.
Oh, the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, the new data that's come out of that, latest findings. Right.
The Shroud of Turin is something that I heard about many, many, many years ago, and I thought it's probably going to be one of these hoax things. And then later I found out, oh, it seems like there's good evidence. And then later someone says, no, it's actually a hoax because of this. Then someone else says, oh, we have even more data, now it seems legitimate. I haven't gone into any study in depth, but the latest that I've heard is it seems like there's legitimacy to it, and someone who apparently is an expert is Gary Habermas, the leading expert in the resurrection, and I'm going to be interviewing him in the next probably month. And I would like him to do a program on the Shroud of Turin in addition to evidence for the resurrection. So if you subscribe to my podcast, you will be hearing that.
Okay, one more question here.
When I was young,
if you can hold the mic up, yeah.
Oh, yeah, to explain this, but when I was young, I loved mathematics. So in our classes, we were taught to, when we did our homework and we divided numbers, we would carry out the decimal so many places. And there was only a certain number of places that were significant figures. And you contrast that to the way in science, how they accept all of these presuppositions that have their way in a negative way. They're insignificant. I mean, the chance that all of these things, and then they multiply on each other, and it's just. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Oh, question. Yeah. So, I guess it. Do you? How can scientists do both? How can you keep the significant information and then accept insignificant, ridiculously insignificant information?
Sure, I'll try to address this as best I can, relatively short fashion, and we'll close the meeting. Most human beings will believe what they want to believe. And whatever belief you can make up right now, you can find some expert out there on the internet who says they've proven it, and then you can believe it because, see, this guy has done research. So you're going to end up believing what you want to believe. So a skeptic who doesn't want to believe the Bible is true is going to tell themselves the evidence proves evolution, even when sometimes probability goes against it. And I'll give you just one example of probability. What are the chances that life formed by accident? Dead chemicals came together 3.8 billion years ago to form a living cell. Okay, if you're an evolutionist, you have to believe that that's reasonable. It could actually happen. Okay, what are the chances? If it's 50-50, that probably would happen. What are the chances? Well, the chances that these dead chemicals came together to form a living cell, as calculated by Sir Frederick Hoyle. He was one of the world's leading mathematicians and astronomers. He was an atheist for much of his life, but he came to the conclusion there must be a God just by studying math and science. He calculated that, and he said the chances that chemicals could come together to form a living cell is only one chance in. I paused on purpose. I used to just blurt out the number, but here's the problem. What's your cutoff? What does that mean? If you find out the chances are less than one chance in some number, you're going to say, okay, that's not an accident. It can't be. What's your number? See, if you don't come up with a number, nothing I share will have any meaning. You have to decide if it's beyond this, there's no way. So what's your number? Let's say, for argument's sake, you say, okay, if there's less than one chance in 10 million billion, then you're going to say there's no way that's an accident. One chance in 10 million billion, that's your number, okay? What was Sir Frederick Hoyle's number? 1 chance in 10 raised to the 40,000th power. Oh, what's that? That's a 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. Okay, it's better with the PowerPoint here, but is that number, a 1 with 40,000 zeros, bigger than your massive number, 10 million billion? A little bit. It is your number times your number, times your number, times your number 2,500 times. Then you get his number. One last thing. Okay, we're dealing with a number so big, it's like meaningless. It's just huge. Here's an analogy to pound it home, and then I'm done. A Rubik's Cube. How many of you ever played with the Rubik's Cube? The rest of you are lying or too tired to raise your hand. A Rubik's Cube has a lot of different combinations to it. It has 10 million trillion combinations, and only one is right. So if you're blindfolded and you're spinning it randomly, you got 1 chance in 10 million trillion of getting it right. No sane person says, yeah, I could do that. We realize, okay, that's not going to happen. Let's compare solving that cube by accident to Sir Frederick Hoyle's massive number. It'd be like me handing you the cube, putting the blindfold on, you start spinning it randomly, and you solve that cube 2,105 times in a row, getting it right every single time. Is it ever going to happen? No. The statistics show it's not going to happen. So why do so many scientists still believe it? It's not because of the science. It's a heart issue. They want it to be true. No matter what you say, they're going to still say, well, it must have happened somehow. So I'll end with that.
Okay, well, let's give him a hand. So the question is, did or can evolution happen? Is it probable or problematical? I would say it's problematical. It is improbable and impossible. So looking ahead, we have Carl Kirby coming next month, and he's going to be here again from Wednesday, April the 23rd through to April the 27th. And you heard one breakfast event mentioned, but his complete program is on our website, theapologeticsforum.org. Just go under events, click on upcoming Apologetics Forum events, and you'll see all the ones where he's going to be speaking. The one he's going to be speaking on here, there's a lot of interest in that now. Obviously, you're seeing some news stories on this. What about artificial intelligence? What can you do with that? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it problematical? Is it ethical? So he's going to address those questions. Carl is the founder and president of Reasons for Hope, and he's got a number of colleagues that also have been here in the past number of years, and so we're looking forward to having you here for those 5 days. So put that on your calendar. Remind you that tomorrow, if you have more questions, we're going to have them do 2 different lectures on creation, the case for creation. And then after, we're going to probably have about a half hour where you can ask some more questions that you didn't get to ask here. So that's at Cornerstone Bible Church in Lake Stevens on Highway 92. And then all the information's on the web or in the flyers in the back. And then Saturday night, tomorrow night, we're going to have him speak at a youth night out. And you saw the flyer if you're interested in pizzas or the Bible or both. And we're looking for youth to come there, but sometimes parents even bring their youth there, so you're welcome as well. So that's in Emmanuel Baptist Church in Snohomish. So that's it. There's more flyers in the back if you want more information, and of course we'll be available to provide more information. Jay will be back at his table there, and he'll you can ask his questions there too. On the back table is also a sign-up sheet. If you're not on our mailing list and you want to be, sign up there. And we have refreshments out there to the side, and cookies and goodies like that. And then Jay's table, and on the other side there's all the Apologetics Forum table. We have lots of DVDs and answers books and a whole bunch of interesting stuff, devotionals, so take advantage of that as well. So let me close in a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, we come to you again this evening just to thank you for the time that Jay could spend with us and present to us the lack of science behind evolution. Lord, this is something that our children need to know about, parents need to know about, what their children are being taught at school as well. And we just thank you for the clear presentation that he gave, and pray that each person goes away with something that he learned that they can share with their family, colleagues, or whoever you put in their path. We just thank you for that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Oh, and remember, there are donation boxes if you care to support the ministry. That's how we bring these speakers out. There's donation boxes, and you can also